Okay, hello everyone. My name is Mike Jones. I am the Director of Education with the Oracle Applications and Technologies Users Group. I'm very excited to welcome everyone to the EBS Upgrade Week session titled EBS R12.2 Upgrade Breaks SSO, How to Re-Implement SSO After the Upgrade. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to make sure you save the date for our Ascend conference next year. It will be in person at the Caribe Royale Resort in Orlando from June 11th through the 14th. I was just talking to the speakers for this session. Really great opportunity to bring your family there and enjoy. It's very close to Disney World, if you're into that kind of thing. Just a reminder for today's webinar, you will be on mute throughout the session. However, you're welcome to send questions at any time through the chat area in the Zoom platform. We'll address questions at the end of the webinar. If you're interested in receiving CPE credits, your participation is required. So make sure you're logged into the webinar for at least 50 minutes and ask a question in the chat area to make sure you're engaged. Additional information about Upgrade Week can be found on the website landing page. We are recording this session. The recording, as well as the slide deck, will be available to EBS Upgrade Week attendees and OETUG members in our knowledge base. You'll see that link in the chat area. And finally, I'd like to turn over today's presenters for today. We have Raj and Nick, and they're with SSOGEN. Thank you so much for presenting. Take it away, guys.
Thank you very much, Mike. We appreciate your comments and introduction. Hello, my name is Nick Spates with SSOGEN. I'm here with Raj Moretti, our CTO and Chief Product Architect. A little bit of background about me. I work with SSOGEN in the commercial operational space, assisting with contract negotiations and also proof of concept trials and testing. Raj Moretti, our CTO, has been in the SSO space for over 20 years. He was there when it started. He has a strong background working with Oracle and one of Oracle's largest customers in the world for several years. And he'll be happy to tell you a little bit more about some Oracle integrations and also a little bit about SSOGEN, SSO solutions for EBS and other Oracle ERP platforms. Next slide, please. I'd like to just share this safe harbor statement. The following is intended for information and educational purposes only and may not be incorporated into any contract. This information is publicly available. Please do your due diligence before making any purchasing decisions. Next, please. What I'd like, or what we'd like to cover today is some of the highlights relative to challenges and opportunities with the EBS 12.2 upgrades and what impact that has on SSO. We'll talk a little bit about the SSO challenges with EBS Upgrade. What are the options available for EBS 12.2 Upgrade customers? We'll take some time to look at some comparisons, to look at other SSO solutions, some of the features, benefits, and advantages and disadvantages. We'll also look at some SSO best practices so that you can be aware of what the best practices are and be mindful as you navigate to 12.2 and integrate SSO into that equation. We'll provide a live demo, EBS 12.2, in this case with Azure AD, one of our most popular integration solutions. And all that can be accomplished in a very succinct 10-minute time period. We'll have some time for frequently asked questions and also some Q&A and any other additional information that we can provide. We'll have a summary at the end, which will allow you to look at additional resources relative to our SSO solution. Next slide. Raj, you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nick. So good morning or good afternoon, based on where you are. I am Raj Maidi. I'm one of the founders and one of the architects of the product of called SSO. But I've been with in the SSO space for a long time with Oracle and many other big organizations. But I'll quickly jump into the topic. So when we upgrade 11i or R12 or 12.1 to 12.2, you have many challenges like dual file systems and WebLogic replacing 10GAS or IAS kind of components. One of the big changes we've seen was that the OSSO 10G, Oracle SSO 10G, which had been a solution for 12.1 out of the box, has been de-supported in 12.2. Basically, if you have any 10GAS SSO or OSSO 10G, after the upgrade, you cannot continue to use that OSSO 10G. And Oracle has deprecated OSSO 10G almost 10 years ago, 2012 or 13 kind of time frame. But even today, we see a lot of customers on 12.1 or 12.1.3 still on OSSO 10G, though it's deprecated, it's still working even today. They just kept updating the Java versions and kept moving it to EL6 to EL7 kind of Linux servers, but it's still the functional SSO in 12.1.3. The moment we do the upgrade, your OSSO 10G breaks all of a sudden. And then, you do have, the whole challenge of, finding the right SSO and getting the same kind of functionality that you have in 10GAS SSO. Things like Kerberos authentication or Windows native authentication, they have to be fulfilled in 12.2. So there are quite a few challenges out there. So we're gonna talk about different options available for 12.2, and we try to compare those options for you to make it easy or to make you kind of informed or educated in terms of different options and what are the pros and cons of each option kind of thing. And we are not here to we're not here to criticize one or the other. We're just comparing the products for the benefit of the customer, and you guys are completely at liberty to test these products and see what makes more sense for you guys and take it forward. But we are here to talk about different options available in 12.2 and compare them technically and give you more information about the best practices, so on and so forth. To start with, so the Oracle, the standard recommendation was back in the day 2012 or 2013 kind of time frame, when we first started 12.2 upgrades, was the OAM, and then there were two versions back then, OAM 10G and 11G. OAM is a product that Oracle acquired from a company called Oblix Access Manager, and that's renamed as Oracle Access Manager back in the day. And that has been the go-to kind of a solution, back in the day when Oracle introduced 12.2 and deprecated OSSO 10G. There's no way for 12.2 to work with the OSSO. And so obviously for Oracle Access Manager, there's the LDAP store behind the Access Manager, which is Oracle Internet Directory. And again, back in the day, it was 10G or 11G. And then there are products like Oracle Identity Federation, which was basically to federate with third-party SSO. For example, if you were to do an integration with ping federate or shibboleth or any SAML integration back in the day. On top of OEM and OID, you gotta have OIF, Oracle Identity Federation. And later on, by 4 or 5 years, that product has been deprecated, and it's been included in OEM with a different license called Suite License as a part of the OEM itself. But again, that's the history when it all started. And then we also have IDCS, which is introduced I think a couple of years ago, which is a cloud identity services from Oracle. And then the third party, meaning which is not which is SSOGEN, that's us basically. We're the only Oracle validated and certified solution back in the day when we got started. So we started around 2014 or so. Our product was out in 2015. We kept working with a lot of big organizations like GE. We can't reveal all the names, but we do have quite a few customers back in the day where we had to migrate them from one SSO to another. Here is the link for Oracle certification and more details published on oracle.com about SSOGEN. So let's quickly review these options and understand how they work, what the differences are in terms of the technology or the functionality. The first and foremost is OEM and OEM versus IDCS. OEM comes from, again, Oracle Access Manager or Access Management kind of product, and IDCS is the cloud SaaS application. So OEM runs on WebLogic. It runs on an Oracle database as a backend. Of course, you have OID behind OEM, and that's completely on-prem. And you don't have any components in the cloud for OEM. But when it comes to IDCS, we do have the SaaS application in the cloud. Both the directory, IDCS has got a cloud directory where you have users and groups that are stored in the cloud as well. So this is on-prem, this is the cloud, and the second one is the way it integrates with the EBS, right? So OEM integrates with EBS as an Apache or OHS, Oracle HTTP server module. It's called a WebGate, or the full name is OEM WebGate. Basically, it's a module file. It's an Apache module that sits on the Apache that delegates the authentication back to OEM server during the login process. Basically, it's the policy enforcement agent in SSO language. So that sits on the EBS OHS, that OEM WebGate, and then you do have OEM server, you do have OID server, you have the database server. Basically, all these components, such as OEM, completely runs on a WebLogic, which is a standard J2E server, WebLogic Java server. And then OID has got both some Java components as well as the traditional C++ kind of code of LDAP server. So, and then IDCS, the way it integrates with EBS is a little different, or completely different compared to OEM. You have to set up a separate WebLogic domain, a separate WebLogic server, and install this asserter. Basically, it's a Java program, basically, that's going to be sitting on a separate container or separate domain, and then it can integrate with your cloud IDCS URL, basically. So it delegates the authentication to the cloud, Oracle Cloud Identity Service, and then that's got the username and password to authenticate, or that's got the connectors to authenticate with different providers. We'll go into that in details in a minute. And then in case of the OEM, we gotta synchronize the user from your Active Directory or your company directory to OID. because you gotta have the OID users um, um, for the EBS authentication, and EBS depends on those users in OID. You could optionally synchronize those users into EBS for the user creation. So that's about the OID. And when it comes to IDCS, you got to synchronize the users to IDCS cloud, basically. Though you don't authenticate with a password, a literal password in the cloud, you still need to synchronize all your users to the identity cloud service, basically that Oracle cloud. Of course, it's your own tenant, but still you got to synchronize the users and make them available, for the authentication to succeed. And then things like Kerberos authentication or Windows native authentication, is supported in OEM. For example, if you log into the Windows domain, Control Alt Del, and then you would do log into your the domain, right? The Windows domain and the username, network ID, and password. Once you log into the network, when you open EBS, EBS doesn't have to authenticate you again with the help of OEM. It can take that network login that's already done, and that can provide a kind of a ticket or cookie, a ticket back to the browser saying that this user is already authenticated. The Kerberos session has been validated with the Active Directory domain controller. So that's the kind of high-level authentication on how Kerberos works. So you basically log into Windows, into your domain controller, and EBS, EBS login with the help of OEM or Kerberos login would not authenticate you again because you are already logged into the network. That's the Windows native authentication, or Kerberos in short. So that's been a very popular solution back in the day, OSSO 10G or 10G AS SSO. And a lot of customers naturally moved to OEM and then configured Kerberos authentication to continue the same kind of login flows that they've got before. However, when it comes to IDCS, the identity cloud, or the cloud SaaS application, right? You cannot have Kerberos authentication. I think it's a kind of limitation. I did notice that there's an enhancement request about its functionality, because it's going to be sitting outside your company network, this IDCS tenant, right? So it cannot communicate with your Active Directory to do the Kerberos ticket validations. So that's not supported on IDCS, basically. And then you have the SAML support. SAML support is still available in OEM with the help of OIF, Oracle Identity Federation, or the latter version of OEM Suite license. And it can work with any SAML providers, such as Azure AD, Okta, Ping, and Shibboleth. And when it comes to IDCS, yes, the SAML IDP or SAML authentication is still supported, just like the on-prem OEM. In fact, that's one of the most popular integration, because people don't want to authenticate with IDCS password. They would rather be authenticated with their SAML IDP, your company SAML IDP. So the MFA compatibility, OEM does have some MFA options, mostly, OEAM, the Adaptive Access Management. And then you have an app, and you can also configure email tokens and the text messages, but they're so complicated to really get them working. We had been implementing those back in the day, like 2012 or so. And then when it comes to MFAs and IDCS, you can still do MFA on IDCS, but neither of these two would support your existing company MFAs. For example, if you guys use RSA tokens to do VPN or to log into something, or something like Duo or Okta Verify or MS Authenticator, those solutions are not, easily integrated with this. So they're not directly integrated with OEM, and you do have some kind of support from IDCS where it completely delegates it to the IDP. It's up to the IDP to integrate with the third-party MFA tokens or the apps. So so at the end of the day, for OEM to work, you do not need any internet connections or pinholes in the firewall or any external access, because it's completely on-prem. When it comes to IDCS URL should be accessible not only from the user browsers but also from the servers. And when it comes to the manageability, the kind of upgrades and outages, and OEM is a much more complex environment to manage. And then when it comes to DR and HA, disaster recovery and high availability, you got to think about the OEM clusters, the WebLogic clusters, and the database clusters. These clusters are centric to one location or one network. They cannot span across different DCs, data centers, meaning though you have a cluster that has to be, the database cluster has to be running right there. Of course, you got to synchronize the data to a different data center and do a switch over. So when it comes to IDCS, you do not really manage anything on the IDCS because it's a SaaS application. So it's all behind the scenes. But at times, you have to keep updating the asserter and make it current, basically. So the bigger trade-off is, if there are any security concerns that we cannot synchronize the users to the cloud by your IT security, then OEM is the better option. But again, it's a kind of a complex environment, or it's a kind of environment that's got a lot of different components. So it's not impossible. We still have a lot of customers, on OEM, and some of the customers are moving away from OEM to IDCS or solutions like SSOGEN. Now let's quickly compare the third solution, which is SSOGEN. This is another solution that's validated and certified by Oracle, as I said. So SSOGEN kind of falls in between OEM and IDCS, and it's kind of best of the both the worlds, meaning it talks to the OHS the same way that OEM used to. If you see that both are on-prem solutions, there's no cloud component, and both are integrating with the EBS OHS server, just like OEM is. In case of OEM, this mod webgate.sl delegates the authentication to your SSO server, right? Which is OEM server, and OEM server decides to do based on the config to either authenticate the user or delegate the authentication to someone else. In case of SSOGEN, there is no SSOGEN server, or there is no directory to maintain like OID. It's a kind of a module that is kind of self-contained, and it doesn't have any dependencies externally, meaning it doesn't have another Linux server running OID or OEM. So it's pretty much so it's pretty much out of the module where it can authenticate with the Azure AD or AD server, ADFS directly without having OEM and OID, basically just one module. It's just one module uh, that is self-contained. So you don't have any backend synchronizations or any other requirements such as OID. You don't have to synchronize the users into the cloud. Sorry, guys. So yeah, and then things like Kerberos authentication, Kerberos Windows native authentication is fully supported, just like OEM, but also other options like SAML. SAML is also supported, which can work with Azure AD, Okta, Ping, and Shibboleth kind of solutions readily. So you do not have to have another server to do or another license to do SAML authentication. SAML authentication, and then the MFA support is completely different when it comes to OEM and SSOGEN. SSOGEN fully works with third-party MFAs like Microsoft Authenticator. For example, if you guys are using Azure AD and MS Authenticator, you can continue to use MS Authenticator even for the EBS logins as well. You do not have to have another type of SSO or another type of MFA. And other apps such as Okta Verify, Duo, and the RSA dongles or RSA tokens, and SMS and email tokens are completely available. So it's got the best compatibility available with the third-party apps, which makes it easier to integrate because you do not have to bring the secondary MFA mechanism into the mix if you are already using if you're already using one type of MFA devices in the company, basically. And then when it comes to the maintainability or the manageability, it's not a server, it's not like OEM server and OID. It's basically one module, and it's pretty easy to update it when there's an update, when there's an update needed. When there's an update needed, and you don't have to really worry about migrations and all that because there's no separate server running. It's just a module file that is sitting on the EBS, and when you have the latest tool from SSOGEN, you basically or the DBA team basically updates that module in the EBS by running the latest command. So just the one module file in OHS, and the maintainability is a lot easier compared to SSOGEN as compared to OEM, where you have servers and databases and OIDs and different upgrades kind of thing. So it's pretty much one tool, one simple utility that we need to run, and then that will do the whole thing. So in a simple language, it's got all the best parts of OEM, but it still acts like a cloud. IDCS features such as SAML and different MFA tokens, but it's not a cloud solution. It's a completely on-prem solutions. You do not have to have any network connections going out of the computer or the EBS servers or EBS user machines to the cloud or something. It's completely on-prem, and I'll go into that in a minute. So it's got best of both the worlds. So you have the lightweight product compared to OEM. It's got all the OEM security still on-prem. It's not a cloud solution, and it does everything that OEM and IDCS combine and more. different features. So this is a quick slide about IDCS versus SSOGEN, and the IDCS is a cloud SaaS application where you have a directory in the cloud. You would synchronize the users, and then you would create a WebLogic domain on-prem and put the asserter and connect these two. And when it comes to SSOGEN, the big difference is this is the cloud, this is the on-prem, this is the cloud, and then this integration is just on the OHS module, just like OEM is, and you don't have any custom asserter. It also uses the EBS out of the box FND auth.var, which is available in FND top, and no special WebLogic domains or no special servers are created. And the best part is it can directly make EBS talk to Azure AD or Okta or any other SAML provider. So there's no user sync necessary to cloud or anything, because this is just EBS talking to Azure AD or on-prem AD directly or Okta. You do not have another directory to synchronize the users to. So that's the big difference. I mean, this is a big differentiator for us because there are some customers who are not willing to synchronize their data to IDCS cloud as per their security policies. And then we do support Kerberos as well. We do support all kinds of integrations with different SAML providers. And then we do have full support for these third-party MFAs that we talked about, Microsoft Authenticator, Okta, Verify, Duo, pretty much. If you guys are using Okta at the company level as an enterprise SSO, you can extend that to EBS. If you are using Azure AD at the company SSO, you could just use that. And then things like Duo and any other MFAs can be Duo and any other email or SMS token, they can be directly accessible. And then the last one is, from EBS servers or the network, you do not need any internet connection. And some more capabilities of SSOGEN, like I said, it's a completely on-prem solution. It's ASIN based on OHS. It can work with different directories. It integrates with a lot of third-party SSOs. We don't have to. I mean, these are the capabilities that we have quickly talked about. And the unique proposition of SSO is that it can be implemented in a few minutes because you do not have those servers to build. You don't have to get the servers and all that. And just a tool execution, or it's more like a SSO tool. We do have a tool called SSOGEN. That's going to be executed by the DBA, and this could be typically implemented in under 10 minutes. You do not have to install you do not have to run any server setups or anything, basically. And it's not some kind of JSP customization or something like that, like somebody else in the market, which are not certified by Oracle. So out of the box support for EBS, you just need to run a command that will enable SSO in a few minutes, and then you take these details and add them to SSO. We do have a live session, a live demo. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. And the big difference between us and some other third parties is, we are not changing some of the JSP files, or we're not, adding our own code to Oracle standard JSPs and saying that this is the SSO. Our SSO works with the Oracle standard EBS JSPs and standard core and standard same pages, and then it works with all the EBS standard SSO profiles. There's nothing customized there. It uses FND auth.var, like I've shown you before, just like OEM. So it's 100% in line with the OEM kind of integration on the EBS side. But how that module works is where the magic is. It can directly talk to AD or Azure AD, basically. And our module is not version specific. So when you upgrade from 11i to 11 to 11i, 11i to R12, 12.1 to 12.1.3, and 12.2x, right? 12.9 to 12.10. All these SSO changes are, intact, meaning none of those things are touched or affected by the EBS versions or patching that you guys do. Just because this is not a customization of some JSP files in EBS, this is, version agnostic, and so we do have SSO support for pretty much all versions of EBS. And some of the best practices I would like to share from our experience. We've been doing SSO implementations for EBS for over 20 years now. So we highly recommend customers to, test the solution in their environment and get to see how it works with their SSO, be it AD, Azure AD, or Okta, or Ping, whatever their company SSO is. Do not just look at some documentation and go into the procurement. We would highly recommend customers do it, because in the market, I do see a couple of players, just talking about some JSP customization as the solution. And of course, it's not only a problem to maintain it, but also it's so fragile that it can break any time, and it's not supported by Oracle. So you gotta go with the standard solution. That's where you would go for a POC, test it out, and get it checked out by your stakeholders and see how it works, what it's doing to the EBS, how it's integrating with EBS. And then you get to know more about it and see if it's certified by Oracle, and does it support EBS standard SSO profiles like SSO login types, all other kind of things, not just, having a couple of JSP files and then calling it as a EBS home kind of thing. So, and then does it support non-SSO logins such as sysadmin kind of accounts, which are not SSO, which are not in AD or Azure AD. So those are the kind of things, and you want to check if it's working with your company MFA or not. And then how easy is it to move from Azure AD to on-prem AD, or on-prem AD to Azure AD, or from one SSO provider to another, like Okta to Azure AD. With SSOGEN, just a 1 second change by the apps DBA just to switch from Okta to Azure AD if the company moves in that direction. And it's not just the EBS, right? It has to work with all the bolt-on applications such as BI, Apex, Hyperion, Discover, OTM, SOA Suite, pretty much each and everything. So you just do not want to get into something that's only supporting EBS and nothing else. And our solution is not just Oracle centric. It works with a lot of ERPs like Oracle, EBS, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, and a lot of bolt-on applications, and then a lot of non-Oracle applications as well, which are typically based on a web server. And that's what you wanna really check, when you validate different SSO providers. Of course, cost is one of those parameters, but these are the things that you want to really make sure that SSO provider meets all this to be able to provide a solution for a system like EBS. And then here's a quick demo. We don't want to do it on the servers. We record that, but it's end-to-end complete setup. I'm going to play like 2 to 3 minutes of this and give you guys a quick feel about what it takes to enable SSO. So At the very first, we're just checking if EBS login is regularly working, and you're able to launch forms and run some concurrent requests. And then EBS DBA, we will get a utility called SSOGEN. This is a utility that I was talking about. And you're going to run it with two options called a deploy AZ. The first option called deploy AZ installs a component called fnd-auth.var to OAE_server1. This is an Oracle standard library, which is available out of the EBS. This is not a custom component by SSOGEN. This is delivered as a part of the EBS itself. The first one is a change to the web logic deploying fnd-auth.var, and the next, that's not the whole SSO, that is just a dependency that you need. And the second command called wedge is the one that is actually enabling SSO in EBS. When you run the wedge command, it would ask you to a couple of details like EBS apps password, and then we do have a key for each customer. And then it provides details like entity ID, reply URL, metadata file for the SSO admin on your company to register this as the app. So you basically share this information once you run these two commands. And then your AD admin, this is typically done by Azure admin or AD admin. They'll create a new app. They'll go to App Store and free gallery app from Microsoft. This is again vetted by Microsoft and it's certified by Microsoft on the Azure gallery. And then you would input that information that's coming from the command execution right there in the previous commands. So you would input the EBS URL and then reply URL basically, and then you would again, this is the Azure AD team's responsibility. So you would set this an attribute that's going from Azure AD into EBS as the name ID. This is the one that has to match with your EBS user record, like username. If you use SAM account name or network ID in EBS, you gotta pick the relevant AD attribute that's available in Azure AD. In case of the network ID, which is the most typical use case for more than 90%, is the on-premises SAM account name, and that will give you the network ID. But again, if you guys created accounts in EBS with the employee numbers, you can also pick a different attribute. And then there are things like transformations. You can combine first name and last name, or get the first letter from the first name, first letter from the last name, and combine and set the responses basically. So, and then at the end of the process, you get a app federation metadata URL that you are getting from this app, and you're going to take it back to EBS and put that download that metadata URL in the EBS right here. You take that and just do curl and pipe it to IDP, and then recycle EBS. And then once you recycle the EBS, when you touch the EBS link, it's gonna take you to Azure AD login in this case, because this is an Azure AD integration. But the process is exactly the same, whether it's Okta or OnLogin or Shibboleth or Ping or Duo or Google Authenticator or AWS SSO. No matter what kind of SSO you use in the company, it works seamlessly. And again, if you were to switch from one SSO to another SSO, you just have to switch that IDP file from Okta IDP file to Azure IDP file, provided they've already added these URLs on the SSO on their side. So again, once the services are recycled, you touch the EBS link and it quickly goes to Azure AD. If you're not already authenticated, it's going to authenticate you. And then this is the same place where it's going to ask you for the MFA authentication as well. And it supports MS Authenticator and all the authenticators that Azure AD supports. And not only that, you can also have a lot of conditional rules, like it's only accessed at a particular time to time or location to location based on IP addresses. So Azure AD gives you a lot of flexibility for conditional rules. And then once you land in EBS, rest of the session is pretty much same as any other EBS session. To be able to log in as a non-SSO user, you can also go to OA HTML apps local login.jsp that still works while the whole system is SSO enabled. You have a special link where you can still enter the EBS username, EBS password, and get into the system. So that's pretty much at a very high level about how the authentication works and all that. And all of this information is on our website. You can feel free to go through a lot of that information, but the whole integration can be achieved in 10 minutes where just run the command twice in EBS, take that information back to Azure or your SSO and get the IDP file, and you're good to go basically. So, and then we do have a couple of different scenarios, demos up here. I don't want to go through all the videos myself, but if you are using any of this, you can also refer to that at a later point. And some of the frequently asked questions, is it only AD or something else can be integrated with EBS? Basically, you can integrate it with the any SAML provider or OpenID, OAuth kind of providers, OpenAuth or OpenID provider, which is again based on OAuth too. So things like Google SSO, if you guys are using Google Suite for the offices, things like IBM 2 Early Access Manager, Auth0, OneLogin, Okta, and on-prem AD, and Azure AD. And it works with a lot of Oracle applications, PeopleSoft JD, SAP. Of course, SAP is not Oracle, but a lot of ERP systems, and then all the bolt-on applications around the EBS. It's not just the EBS only solution. If you're using anything that's integrating with EBS, you would also need SSO onto those applications as well. Again, I think we talked about a lot of this. It's completely on-prem, and you don't have to synchronize any users. You do not need any network connections. So I think we have about 10 minutes left. I'll be happy to take some of the questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please type them into the chat area. I know there was a lot presented on SSO, so please, if you do have any questions, these guys are experts, so please type them in.
And if you guys need to explore more or test it in non-production, we do have a completely free license key that you guys can use in one of the non-prods and get a feel. And there are no strings attached. It's completely free solution, and most of our customers test that before they go to any serious discussions.
And we did get one question. It's in the chat area. If the application local login page is still available, then that means that the user can bypass the SSO. Can this be prevented?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, you can have both the options open, and you can restrict non-SSO login by a couple of means, or in a couple of different ways. There is a profile option called, let me quickly bring up the profile option. It's called application SSO, SSO login types, basically. So that profile option can be used to restrict who can log in with SSO, who can log in with the non-SSO, or both, basically. So let me quickly bring up that profile option. So this is the video just played. So there's a lot of information up here. If you guys need to really, test it out, and how the login flow and the whole thing. So this is the profile option. So by default, SSO login types is both, which means that you can do SSO login via SSO, the regular login. You can also do apps local login with the local password. But if you set this to SSO only instead of both, they can only do SSO. You can set the site level value, which makes sense for most of the users. And then you can also set the local user level value to override the site level value. For example, for sysadmin account, you can have both, or you can have local, and all other users, you can have SSO at the site level and null values for all the users kind of thing. So it's manageable, it's controlled by this purple option. And secondly, companies such as some security concerned companies, they would also knock out the password in EBS. They randomize the password in EBS just because it's not only just the login mechanism. So they don't want to keep any password in EBS anymore, because EBS sends you to Azure or your SSO company SSO when you log in. So there's no need for the local password in EBS basically. And that's another way. And then there's another way where you can also do a custom rewrite in Apache or OHSConf where this page is completely blocked. And if you're running internal and external SSO or EBS internal and EBS DMZ for these I modules, internet modules such as iSupplier, iProcurement, iReceivables kind of modules outside, you could also block this in URL firewall file on the DMZ so that nobody from outside can use any passwords when they log into Oracle, because, you can have a very security system, but if the user puts something like Oracle 123 password in the system, that's the biggest weak link. It's not the firewall, it's not your OS patching. It's basically the end user who puts a password like Oracle 123 is easily crackable. That's what is happening in the security industry, where you can implement, all this kind of security stuff. But if user is using a simple password, and that is a big security hole in the whole thing. So user is the weakest link in the whole thing. So you can achieve that either by the profile, by changing the passwords, or by having a URL firewall rule that restricts this particular JSP. Only this JSP allows local logins, nothing else. Any other questions?
Yeah, we did get one more and related to that. It's can you bypass the SSO in web ADI?
Web ADI supports SSO though. Typically in Web ADI, what you do is you log into EBS and you download an XML sheet, right? You download an XML template, right? And then you see the data, or you manipulate the data, or you insert the data and try to upload it, and then it refers back to the session that's already in the browser. So we do have quite a few customers using SSO along with the Web ADI. And it's one of the core functionality in the way that they manipulate the data. But Web ADI supports SSO. And if you were to bypass, I think you want to bypass with the app's local login JSP and log in with the EBS password, and then download the template. I think you can still do it, but Web ADI supports SSO, and all of our customers, we do have a couple of hundreds of customers. More than 100 customers in EBS and quite a few S&P 500 companies. They all use Web ADI a lot. Companies like GE, they use Web ADI day in and day out. We're talking about, kind of 2+ million logins in a day from a company like GE, where we had about 700,000 kind of users in EBS. So Web ADI supports SSO completely. We do have a couple of more minutes. If you guys don't have any other questions, I'll bring up the last slide. I think, so.
Raj, I'll take it from here. If you have any additional questions, we wanted to share this information broken down with different EBS, PeopleSoft, JDE, and SAP ERP integrations. Also, if you've got an interest in learning more about how we can tailor a solution for your SSO upgrade, please keep us in mind. Drop us a quick email at info@ssogen.com. We can have a quick Zoom meeting and discuss your particulars and offer you the opportunity, as mentioned, to try out the SSO software in a non-prod environment. So we thank you very much for your time today. We hope this has been educational, and we look forward to answering any additional questions via email. And as offered, happy to set up a personal call to review it with you and your team relative to what options you may have for EBS 12.2 upgrade integration.
All right, that'll conclude our webinar. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.